Hey, welcome to Gold's Garage. And so if you watched some of my videos before, you've heard me compare the startup of a new engine with a flat tappet camshaft to the birth of a baby. And the analogy is, if it lasts the first 20 or 30 minutes, it's probably going to have a long and happy life. And so in the previous video, which is episode 7 of our budget build, Mike Kimball's budget build 350, I started this engine up. I went through all the process and the procedure to get to the started up and ran it for a minute or two on camera, and that's where we left it. We shut it off. So today we're going to do now we have the baby, it's born and it's in the incubator. This is my analogy, my test stand is an analogy to an incubator for an engine, and we're going to go through all the diagnostic checks that we need to talk about to determine it's alive, but how healthy it is. So before I forget, I have to mention a couple things. Alley-oop made a nice compliment to my wife Mariana because he said beautiful yard, and that's all on her. She does all the work on it, and she's actually holding the camera right now. So Alley-oop, I passed on your compliments to her, and she was very grateful. So, and for everybody else who left me a whole bunch of other great comments, that's how I get my psychic income, is reading them. And before I go any further, please like and subscribe if you can. Send it to a friend, send it to a Facebook page or something. And the more people we can reach, the more people we can help. So that's the way I look at it. So I appreciate you doing that for me. So today I'm going to go through since the episode 7, once again, when we left it, we started it up and ran it for a few minutes and shut it off. Since then, I've actually started this engine 4 times. It's got more than 30 minutes of runtime on it. Basically brought it up to operating temperature and shut it off as I said I would. And so it's been run 4 times. It's got enough time on it that it's time to do diagnostics. Now, along the way, even after the first shut off, just to be sure, took the valve covers off, checked the valves, and checked the oil filter as well, just to make sure. But now we're going to do all that stuff today. So let me just list all the things that we need to do to determine the health of the engine. One of the things that we're most anxious about, if it's a flat tappet cam, is that it lose, damage a lobe or a lifter, did the lifter go flat, the lobe go flat. And so we're going to go through the whole check procedure, and I'm going to show you how to do that today in just a few minutes. It's not very complicated. And I'm going to show you how to adjust a valve as well. So other things that you can do to determine the health of your engine. One of the first things that I do, I mentioned this before, is I use this is what it looks like when it's new before it gets all dirty, Moroso oil filter screen. So there it is. I've just taken it out of the engine just to save you time watching me do that. I have to put it back in because I have to crank the engine over. So there's the little screen, and that's what it looks like after running for 30 minutes. Pretty nice. A few little wee specks here and there. That's kind of normal. We kind of call this rags and rubber in the industry. There's always some little stuff in there, but nothing to be concerned about. If the camshaft was going, there would be a lot of shrapnel in there, and it wouldn't be hard to tell that you got a problem. But it's going to be good. And so now on that, other ways to do that if you don't want to use, I talked about this Moroso screen before. A couple other things that you can do. One is, I'm going to change the oil now anyway. After the first break-in, I change the oil before it goes to the dyno. I might as well talk about the oil now. When we saw the break-in, I had 2050, Lucas 2050, break-in oil with high zinc. And I'm going to go to Lucas break-in oil with high zinc again, only this time only SAE 30, because if you watch my run stand, we had about 80 psi of oil pressure on this engine, and that's more than enough, more than we need or more than we even want. And one of the reasons we have that is this engine has got a high volume oil pump, and we used it because we had it. I would never have bought a high volume oil pump. It doesn't really hurt anything, but you do not need it. It does take a few horsepower away from you, and unless you got something really crazy going on, you're going high RPM, whatever, you don't need it. So now we're actually got the problem trying to take oil pressure out of this engine because it's got pretty good bearing clearances. So we're going to go to 30 weight oil, and on the next startup, we're expecting that the oil pressure will go down a little bit anyways. So other ways of checking your health of your oil, it's kind of like the analogy of using my engine test stand as an incubator. This is kind of like taking a blood sample, and so sample of your oil. So you can filter the oil back into the empty can that you started with and filter it with a paint filter using a very, very fine paint filter. If anything is in there that shouldn't be, you'll find it in the paint filter. The other thing, which I used to do, which a lot of people still do, and it's fine, is cut the filter apart and you lay all the pleats out on the bench. It's actually probably 6 feet long when you stretch the pleats out, and take a strong light and inspect the pleats and look for little pieces of shrapnel, aluminum, steel, or whatever. And that will also tell you whether you got something nasty going on in your engine. So one of the points to make too, so this way I find now is the most efficient. Take this out and inspect it, put it back in, and I'm going to put it back in now because I have to crank this engine over to show you the valve setting. And so obviously if I do that without a filter in, I'm going to pump oil in the ground, so I can't leave it in there. So question is, if you have a camshaft going bad on you, it doesn't just destroy the cam and the whole set of lifters, of course. It destroys the whole engine, because that shrapnel, if there is any coming off the cam, if you look at the mass of material on the lobe of a camshaft, and that comes off, it's got to go somewhere, and it finds its way in the bearings. And so you're probably going to say, well, that's what oil filters are for, and that's what I used to think too. But you'd be surprised how much oil gets past your oil filter. So here's a typical oil filter bypass. And so this little guy here is a relief valve on the oil filter bypass. This is a used one, obviously. And so if you get a high pressure in your oil system, this will bypass. And what it does, it takes oil and pumps it directly back in the circle and doesn't filter it. And for that reason, oil can get by your oil filter without going through it. And oil filters themselves, unless it's a racing oil filter, has an internal bypass as well. And that's there. One of the reasons it's there, because if you were to start up on a real cold day with thick oil, you might have enough oil pressure to burst the oil filter. So those are the reasons it's there. And so don't get lulled into thinking, I got an oil filter, so that's what they're for. Well, they are, but if a cam goes bad, all that grit gets into your bearings, your main bearings, your rod bearings, your thrust bearings. All that's got to get changed. You'll probably end up regrinding your crankshaft and do a bunch of other work on it before you fix it. So it's really collateral damage from a camshaft failure. So that's one of the first things we look at, and then adjust the valves. Now, I'm going to mention a few other things. I can't do them all in this video. We will do them in future videos. One of the things I already did do was pull all the spark plugs, and I put them all back because I want them in when I crank the engine over. And that's also an indication of the health of your engine. That's a specimen from inside your engine. And so I mentioned before, this is an AC43 spark plug. Typically in a situation like this where we're just running the engine on a stand, it's prone to getting the spark plugs wet. Could cause a misfire. So the 43 spark plug kind of solves that. But if I had an oiling problem, for example, let's say you had a valve guide or a valve seal or something, you probably see evidence in that in your spark plug. So I've taken them all out, but I put them all back in except the one. I just wanted to show that. So a few other things that we can do, which I've already done. This is a pressure tester. You put it on the radiator and you can simulate operating pressures into the engine and watch if it holds. I put 15 to 20 psi in this engine already, and that checks out okay. If you have any water leaks in your engine or a head gasket leaking or something, that's going to show up when you do that. A couple other diagnostic checks which we will get to in a future video after. So what I'm going to do after this video is done, I'm changing all the valve springs. The valve springs on it now are just the original stock springs. They only have 70 or 80 pounds on the seat and less than 200 pounds open. So I'm going to put the correct valve springs. That's an important thing to do as well. But in the process, going through it, when I got this plugs out and the valve springs out, I have to take every plug out anyways. Two other tests: is a compression test and a leak down test. And so first of all, the compression test to see, we estimated the compression on this engine, so we'll see if we achieve what we estimated based on the dynamic compression ratio and static compression ratio, and the dynamic based on the camshaft opening events and closing events, etc. And then a leak down test, and particularly if there's a low compression cylinder, a leak down test will do. I have a Moroso leak down tester. It doesn't just tell you if you have a percentage of leak down, it tells you where it is, because if it's out the exhaust valve, it's going to be one of three places: the intake valve, exhaust valve, or into the crankcase. So some leakage into the crankcase is absolutely normal, and these rings have not been broken in yet, so I'm expecting, a higher than normal number until the engine is broken in, until the rings are broken in. But no leakage on the intake exhaust valves is normal. And so when we do a compression test, we essentially put air in the cylinder, and if it's leaking at the intake valve, you can hear it come up the carburetor. If it's leaking in the exhaust valve, we take the headers off to do that. You can hear it coming out the exhaust valve. So that's a good diagnostic. We're going to do that after we change the valve springs, and so we'll talk about that in the future video. So next I'm going to show you how to check all your valves. And so just to save time, I took all the hardware off the valve covers, and we'll take them off now. So when I change these valve springs, I'm also going to change the rocker arms. These are 1.5 to 1 ratio rocker arms. I'm going to use 1.6s to give Mike a little extra lift. That reminds me of something else. I have a request from someone who's involved in circle track racing, and the specs on this, I think I mentioned before, this camshaft is circle track cam, and the specs on this engine are very similar to some circle track rules that are used around the country that require the use of a 2-barrel carburetor, steel heads, a camshaft with, I think, less than 450 thousandths lift, which is what we have. And so that viewer asked me if we could dyno the engine with a 2-barrel carburetor, because they also require the use of a 500 CFM 2-barrel carburetor. And of course, the racing that I do here in Canada, we also use a 500 CFM carburetor. We have 3 of them. And so I'm going to bring one of them to the dyno with me, and I'm going to try to make at least 1 or 2 pulls with a 500 carburetor. This other carburetor is my 650 double pumper Holley. I've had this for about 50 years, and believe it or not, it still works pretty good. I've used it on the dyno before. And so we're going to compare the 650 Holley to the 500 CFM 2-barrel. And don't be surprised if they're very, very close. You'd be amazed how much power. We use that 604 crate engine that's only got 9-to-1 compression, a smaller cam than this, 4 tech heads, and you'd be surprised how much power it can make with a 2-barrel carburetor. So we're going to find out when we get to the dyno. So I forget the name of the subscriber that asked me to do that, but I'm going to answer your question, and we're going to try and do that when we get to the dyno. So the valve covers are off. So the next thing I'm going to show you how to check valves very quickly. So I'm going to use a little mock-up here. So go back to the description. I've talked about this before. Every time the distributor turns once, the harmonic balancer turns twice. So camshaft timing, or timing firing order, sorry, I used the wrong words. So your firing order is 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. So the first time the harmonic balancer goes around, you fire number 1 8 cylinder, 8, 4, 3. The second time, 1 and 6 are at the same point on the harmonic balancer. The next time is 6, 5, 7, 2. So a suggestion, this is what I do with every engine, is I put all those marks on the harmonic balancer. This balancer has the marks on it, but it's hard to see down there, so I actually mocked up another one for you, just to see. So there's 1 and 6, so 1 and 6 go together, 8 and 5, 8 and 5 go together, 4 and 7 go together, and 2 and 3 go together. So you can see that. So if we start off, wherever we start off, it doesn't even matter. And as the balancer turns, it turns clockwise. So the first time, let's say we start at 1. So all we need to do is rotate the crankshaft 90 degrees to the next point, and after we do number 1 valve, then we do number 8 valve, for example. So we can get around this engine pretty quick. So the only thing we need to do before we start is to know where we are when we start. So we need to know where the galldarn rotor is to start, because once again, when the rotor goes around once, the harmonic balancer goes around twice. So in order to do that, I already loosened it off. And so number 1 is over here. So this is pretty close to number 6. Maybe not right on, but now I know it's pretty close to number 6 because it's not number 1, right? And so I got to put that back on because I'm going to be cranking the engine over. So give me a second to deal with that. It's always a challenge. Make sure there's nothing in the way. There we go. I got to get a screwdriver, sorry. I don't have one out here. I will get one. Yes. Okay. So now I know that the rotor is over here. Once you determine that, you could start anywhere. You don't have to start at number 1. Okay? And for purposes of checking valves, all we're doing is making sure that when we're adjusting the valve, the camshaft is on the base circle. And I'm going to show you that in a little display here in a second. Put these down. So, a viewer mentioned discussion about another way that you can check your valves when the intake closes, check the exhaust. Exhaust closes, check the intake. When the intake's closing, check the exhaust. So it's exactly the same logic. All we're trying to do is make sure that when we're checking, the lifter is on the base circle of the camshaft and not on the lobe. If you were to adjust it when it's on the lobe, when the lobe goes away, you're going to have a big clearance, obviously, right? So that's all we're trying to accomplish. There's numerous ways to do that. This is the way that I do it, and I think it's the fastest way. So need power on. Oh, I've got to put my filter back on because if I don't, I'm going to be spilling oil all over the place here. Just give me a minute to do that. A little tricky little job here. Slippery. Nothing goes smooth when you're on the camera, right? There we go. I think I got it. Okay. Now, power on. I'm going to crank the engine over. So if you come around here, Mariana. So I know I'm close to number 6. So the number that's going to come up, if you looked at my little chart, is either going to be 1 or 6. So if I bump the starter, whoop, to kind of get down here, you know, I got to get a light to make it helpful. Just a second here. tricky to see down here, and this is why I did it the way I did it. So there's 3 and 2. We've gone by there already. So, okay, there's number 1. It's either 1 or 6, one or the other, if you go back to the other chart. And because I just looked at the rotor, I know it's not 6. It's not 1, it's 6 down there. So I can actually set the valve on number 6 first. So I'm going to go right around the whole engine. So when I assemble this engine, I set the valves. There's no need to ever set them again in the life of the engine. If everything goes right, and it has been going right. So all we do on the check is I come around here as I go through. This is number 6 cylinder, right? 2, 4, 6, 8. And there's no clearance, there's no gap. The push rod doesn't have any gap. So I know that camshaft lobe is good, the valve hasn't backed off, and it's in good condition. So I'm going to similarly go right around the engine and watch how fast we can do that. So 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 6, 5, 7, 2, right? So the next one is 5. So there's the mark, the second mark, so that's 5. There's number 5 cylinder. Okay. There's 7. That's all you need to do. Do not unadjust and readjust every time. You're just going to cause a problem. If you adjust it right in the first place, you don't have to worry about it. The next one is number 2. There we go. 2 is over here. Now we're back to number 1 next time. Okay, 2 is the last one, so number 1 is next. So next time I come around, the pulley's going to come around. The distributor is only going around once, but the vibration harmonic balancer is distributor's got around halfway, and the balancer's gone around 1 complete turn. So back to 1 again. So there's 1. It's good. No clearance, no gaps. That's all we do. There's 8. And you'll see it's not exactly on. It doesn't have to be. We're so far away from the lobe of the valve that if you're close within 10 or 20 degrees, you don't have to worry about it. There's number 8. And 4 is next. 4. Over there, sorry, there's 4. It's good as well. 1, 8, 4, 3, and 3 is next. 3 is there. There, we just checked all the valves. They're all done. That's how easy it is. Do not, if you're readjusting your valves, unscrew them and do it all again because you're just likely to cause a problem. One of the things I do every time we take the valve covers off is take a 5/8 wrench and just go over, once we've done all that, and just make sure they're all nice and snug. And I'll save you time watching all that. And so, what cylinder are we on now? We just finished. I need to go back around to 1, eh? Okay, I need to pick one that's. I started at 6, eh? 6, 5, 7, 2, 1, 8, 4, 3. Okay, so 6 is next. If I come around, oh, we're at 3 now. Okay, sorry about that. I'm jumping around a little bit. So I'm going to adjust one valve and show you how easy it is. So let's back this one guy off. Oh, it's not a 5/8. It's actually, I got 2 different sizes of. It won't take long to fix that. Number 3. Back this guy off. So this is the intake for number 3 cylinder. And I'm backed right off. You see I got lots of clearance there. Okay. So all you need to do, if you're sure you're off the base circle, you're on the base circle, you're not on the lobe of the cam, snug it down until you have no clearance. And if you feel the push rod as you're snugging it down, you can actually do with your fingers. I can feel where it's finger tight there, and the push rod's getting hard to turn. Okay, so I use a half a turn. People use different amounts. I typically use a half. So what I do is go not quite a half initially, then lock down the Allen nut adjuster, snug that up, and then tighten them both together. And that finishes it off. That's all you have to do to set your valve. Now I have a half a turn of preload, which is probably 30 or 40 thousandths of preload on the plunger. Follow the whole, so if I was to do number 3, I do both of them and follow the same cycle that I just explained to you now. So hopefully that you find that helpful. Sometimes people get themselves in trouble trying to do too much. That's all you need to do. If you set the valves right the first time, don't go and unadjust them and reset them every time, because you're not going to improve anything. I have never, that I can think of ever, for a long time anyway, readjusted any rocker armor valve lifter after it's been installed. So that's all I have for you today. Hopefully you found that interesting and helpful. Please like and subscribe again. We sure like to get subscribers. We love the new ones, and that's my psychic income, watching new subscribers come on board. And we're going to work hard. We have a succession of other videos. We're going to do more diagnostics. We're going to be to the dyno. This is a Thursday, a week from this Saturday. And so we're going to dyno this engine, once again, with this carburetor. And if you're a stock car guy with a 500 CFM, these Holley 2-barrel racing carburetors, by the way, they're a lot better than you probably think they are if you haven't ever used one. They work pretty good. So we're going to do that and try to validate Mike Kimball's theory that we can budget build. And Mike's going to come up with his final budget for you on a future video, showing what it ended up being. And the next question is, did we meet the budget? Next question, did we make the power that we're supposed to make? So we'll find that out when we get there. Thank you for watching Gold Scratch, and have a good night.